Brothers and sisters, on this 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time, I invite you to reflect with me on the theme of humility. The first verse of the first reading from the book of Sirach today captures the message that I wish to share with you so clearly. The Lord says, "My child, conduct your affairs with humility." And the writer goes on to say, if you wish to find favor with God, you must live a life of humility. Now, in one of his most moving passages on humility, a letter that St. Augustine wrote in answer to a question posed to him by a young Christian, Dioscorus, who was asking St. Augustine about the most important Christian virtue. St. Augustine says there are three of them. The first, humility. The second, humility. The third, humility. And he goes on to say, and as long as you ask this question, the many times you ask it, I will give you the same answer, humility. Because unless humility precedes your action, accompanies your action, and follows your good deeds, pride will spoil all your good deeds, and you waste your time in self-congratulation. So what is humility? I think the best way to understand humility from the Christian teaching and Christian spirituality is to look at the image of our God. St. Thomas Aquinas says that the most distinguishing characteristics of God is humility. And that means that God bends down to us. God comes down to us. God steps down from the heavens in order to make a home with us. Just as we heard in the responsorial psalm, God, in your goodness, you have made a home with the poor. In that famous prayer of Solomon during the consecration of the temple in Jerusalem, in 1 Kings chapter 8, we capture the profundity of the meaning of humility. Solomon prays, he says, God, even the heavens cannot contain your glory, but you have condescended to be available to us in this temple that we have made. Isn't that the same thing for us in the Catholic Church? The majesty of God, the glory of God comes down in that tabernacle. That God comes and allows himself to be contained in the tabernacle, in the elements of the host, in the elements of the wine, in the elements of water, in the elements of the cross. God accommodates God's self to our own human level. The heavens cannot contain God, but then God allows himself to be contained in that tabernacle. That's humility. It's the same humility that Jesus displayed when he emptied himself, as we read in Philippians chapter 2, verse 8 to 9. Though his nature was divine, he did not hold on to it. Rather, he emptied himself. The same humility he showed during the Last Supper, when he took the position of a slave, again condescending, going down, bending down to us always, as God does, to wash the feet of his disciples. We find another definition and a good example of humility in the life of the Blessed Virgin Mary. When the angel came to Mary, he says, "Hail Mary, full of grace." Mary is full of grace because Mary was empty of herself. And she captures that so very well in Luke chapter 1, verse 48 in the Magnificat, when she says, in similar words that we heard in the gospel reading today, that you have brought down the proud and lifted up the lowly. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So humility means that each and every one of us will recognize who we are. We are creatures, not the Creator. Every good thing around us comes from heaven above. So whatever I am, whatever I have, is not because of my own merit, it's because of the mercy of God. That should make me humble, recognizing that everything comes from God. My total dependence on God, your total dependence on God. We must recognize also that we are fallible, we are imperfect, we are sinful, we are perishable. One day we will be gone from this earth. That should make us humble, knowing that we are not the principle of life. We receive life from above. That should make us grateful for everything that we have, because we are here today, gone tomorrow. Whatever it is you have, God has given to you for God's glory, not for your own glorification. That's why even in our world today, when we hear that someone is full of himself or full of herself, that's not a compliment. People flee away from such people. In our days, we must again, as Christians and as a church, look into ourselves. What are the criteria we use for giving honor and for shame? What are the social stratification we have built, the hierarchies that we have built, the titles that we have given ourselves? And how are we so self-absorbed that sometimes who we are becomes an obstacle to God and to divine operation in our lives? I saw a signboard a few years ago of a church, and the priests puts his name on the signboard, Reverend so and so, BA, BD, THD, MD, PhD, and then your humble servant. These titles, this self-adulation, this self-congratulation, this self-absorption of us, humans, perishable human beings, are only obstacle to divine operation in our lives. We must recognize that we are here on earth because the Master has sent us here. And everything we have and everything we do, we must give God the glory. The parable in the gospel today is an eschatological parable because it tells us of what is to come. It tells us that our life here on earth is like a feast. God has sent us to this banquet. But there is a bigger banquet waiting for us. So while we are here on earth, our duty is to take the second place, to serve the good of others. Because when you're humble, The emphasis, the gaze is on others and on God, not on yourself. When you're humble, like Mother Teresa says, you are not deflated by criticism, because when people criticize you, you recognize they're only telling you that you're human. And when they praise you, it doesn't go into your head. You don't get inflated by praise or flatteries, because you recognize the source of the blessing. I mean, if you're a holy person, think of Mother Teresa. If someone said, Mother Teresa, you are so holy, when she was alive, she's not going to say, that's great, thank you. She will kind of withdraw, really. Like all the saints. Peter says, depart from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. So the parable tells us something about the call to humility. That this feast that we have been invited, there are two of it, the one that we are celebrating now on earth and the one that is to come. If you spend your life here on earth in self-adulation, being self-absorbed, being full of yourself, and who you are becoming a problem to people around you, and the titles and the roles and position that God has given you, you are conducting yourself as if it is by your own merit. Then when you die and you come to the gate of heaven, what will God say to you? He said, well, you've had all the glory on earth. So you've had it all. But if you're humble like Mary, and if you embrace the humility of our God, when you come to that gate, God will say to you, come to the high table. Come and enjoy the glory prepared for the humble, for the simple, for those who recognize their own poverty and see in the poor also what God sees in them. Come and enjoy the glory of heaven. May Jesus give us the grace to recognize who we are, to recognize the purpose of our life here on earth, and to live a humble life, a simple life, a life of holiness and a life of service to everyone, especially the poor, the lonely, and those who are abandoned.